My phone's ringing to tell me that it's time for the Zoom call. Okay, now it's stopped. So if you are ready, we are pushing live. So we're capturing those folks.
Okay,
And um, yeah, so you feel good?
I feel good. I'm ready.
Fabulous, fabulous. So we get started here.
So I'll start once you do the introductions.
Okay, great, great. And we have a little spiel that we do about BCPH, just real quickly.
Okay.
I'm just going to steal back screen sharing really quickly. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is part of our ongoing fall series where we're highlighting the accomplishments of our 40 under 40 public health catalysts and health innovators. We're so excited today to welcome Nadine Spring, who's going to be talking about her journey as a practitioner of public health. But before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that you're very special because as for those who are joining us today, you're going to be selected. One of you are going to be selected to receive a free elite membership. So, as you may know, this is our third anniversary. And in celebration of our anniversary, we have overhauled our memberships for BCPH. As you know, we democratize public health through the lens of social justice and health equity. And we do that through a variety of trainings, educational initiatives, and the like, just like the one that we're having today with the webinar. One of the things that we have done in terms of restructuring our membership is that we now have an elite membership, which has improved um, different facets that benefits for members. This includes new awards and recognitions, including one for outstanding practice and distinguished careers. We also have a new range of grants that are eligible, that are available for those who are elite members. And these range between $750 to $1,500. You also have opportunities to be part of a member showcase, to promote your research. If you need someone to participate in your survey or become a member of your study, you can promote that through us. And then there are also opportunities to mentor other public health practitioners, and you also get exclusive invitations to participate as a faculty member for different educational initiatives that we put on. So, in terms of um, the initiative itself, in terms of membership, it is $215 for the year. However, because you join today, in addition to the person who's going to be getting a free membership, we also are providing a special offer for $175. You get 3 years of membership, which is an immense savings of over $400. And then, of course, if you are a member, you get to submit articles for free as well as different reduced publication offerings to price. So I don't want to take up time away from our wonderful speaker today. Let me introduce her very briefly. Dr. Nadine Spring. She's a longtime advocate addressing diversity in clinical trials to achieve equitable care and outcomes. Her professional journey, which she's going to be sharing with us today, has reflected her dedication to addressing disparities in healthcare access and fostering inclusivity in research methodologies. Dr. Spring is an assistant professor in public health, and she also is owner of Springwell 360 LLC, a firm dedicated to addressing health equity. So as you can tell, Dr. Spring really fits in with the BCPH family. We're very excited to have her today. And Dr. Spring, if you would like to share your slides, I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Cersei, and I'm happy to be here. I just want to make sure you can see my slides, okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll go
And if
ahead
folks
and
need
get
to share any
started.
questions with you, they can put them in the chat or in the Q&A section.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the questions at the end and throughout my presentation today. So as Dr. Cersei mentioned, I will be sharing my public health and clinical research journey. And welcome to today's session. I'm also going to be sharing about, my entrepreneurial path with Springwell 360. I have nothing to disclose. So here I'd like to talk to you about, how I ended up in public health. And there were several things that really shaped my inspirations and my experiences. So firstly, I entered the field of public health by accident. I did not go to college thinking I was going to end up in, working in public health. In fact, the terms public health were probably not even on my radar as a high school student deciding to major in biology as an undergrad student. So I majored in biology as an undergraduate. And then when I graduated, I started working entry level as a research assistant at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York City. And Mount Sinai School of Medicine happens to also have an MPH program. So I started realizing that even though I was pre-med in undergrad, I didn't really want to go down the path of medicine, but I still wanted to be involved in healthcare some way. I didn't want to be hands-on with patients and diagnosis and treatments, but wanted to be involved in healthcare some way. And I learned about the MPH program at Mount Sinai. And so while working in the daytime, on evenings, I started taking non-matriculating classes just to get my feet wet and know more about the program. So I took Intro to Public Health. And I fell in love with public health from taking that class, and I ended up applying to the program, getting accepted. And then I moved on to working in, clinical research as a research assistant first, then moved on to work in clinical research, then research manager, then director of clinical research, while along the way pursuing a second master's degree in clinical research, as well as a PhD in public health. So my initial roles in clinical research, working from entry level all the way up to director level, they really helped to give me, hands-on experience in managing trials. And I started to see firsthand how the people living day to day with certain conditions were not really represented in the clinical trials. You weren't really seeing them participating and signing up and coming to research visits. And that's when I started to realize that there's a gap, and we really need to focus more on addressing these gaps with representation when it comes to clinical trials. I noticed this in a pre-COVID world. And unfortunately, COVID happened. And then now we started having more conversations, especially with health disparities and who was disproportionately affected by COVID. Then we started having more conversations. And now I start seeing, symposiums and conferences designed all along with the topic of diversity in clinical research. So along the way, with starting entry level, pursuing my degrees, I have been very fortunate to have, mentors who have helped to guide me and encourage me, many of whom are trailblazers in public health. And some of them I found by attending webinars just like this and seeing whose research interests aligned with mine and reaching out to them. So, their insights, their advice, they've been really important and pivotal in helping me to navigate my career path and, deciding on my research niche as I, advance my work today. So I'll talk a little bit about my clinical research journey. So my first position out of undergrad was as a research assistant at Mount Sinai Medical Center. Later, I went on to become a clinical research coordinator at what is now called Northwell Health in the Northeast. Then I became a manager for the Lupus Center, where I, led a lot of research studies, both clinical trials as well as observational studies at Hospital for Special Surgery, working in the rheumatology department. I stayed there for about 6 years, and then I went on to Emory University, where I worked as director of clinical trials for the Department of Pediatrics. And I moved on then to Morehouse School of Medicine, where I worked as a project director for the research centers in minority institutions. So, all of this taught me quite a bit. It really taught me, from navigating positions from entry level all the way up to director level. It really taught me that there were certain things we were seeing that were consistent. And that is, we really need to work on diversity in clinical trials because it's really affecting health disparities and leading to wider gaps in health equity. So now I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about my shift for becoming a public health professor. This is a position I really love, and I shared with you my previous experience working in clinical research and working on lupus studies and seeing how the people who live with lupus day to day weren't really represented in the clinical trials that were being done to advance care for people living with lupus. And so my years of experience as in clinical research, especially on health equity, helped to really give me a unique perspective that I'm able to share with my students, that I'm able to share with others. And I realized that beyond conducting research, whether it's as director of clinical research, I could have a broader impact, a wider impact, a larger impact by educating and informing others, right? I'm basically working on advancing public health and educating the next generation of these professionals. So the knowledge and the real world insights that I gained from working on clinical trials have been able to translate really naturally into the classroom. I was able to bring practical experiences and case studies from what I saw working on clinical trials into why this is important. Why do we need to address this? How can we help to bridge this gap? And it really helped me to bridge the gap between theory and practice. So, and I also worked as an adjunct professor before heading, full-time into being, the assistant director and associate professor of the public health program at the University of Bridgeport. And so not only do I get the opportunity to teach, but I'm also guiding students through, their internships, their capstone projects, and into their future careers as public health professionals, because as they are students developing their capstone projects, that's where they really get a sense of, their niche area in public health and what it is that they want to work on. So for me, I find it really rewarding and impactful to see these students hone in on their skills and the confidence that they need to make their own impact in the field. And I find it very meaningful and purposeful as we prepare for tomorrow's public health challenges. And I really believe that through education, information, and awareness, we can really help to foster more equitable and a more healthier world. For many, they're simply not even aware that clinical trials are an option to their care. And so awareness is a huge factor for me. So now I'd like to introduce Springwell 360. And this is a health equity company that I founded, which focuses on advancing diversity in clinical trials and promoting health equity in underserved communities. So like I mentioned, many people simply aren't even aware of a clinical trial as an option to care. And if you look at the data, some patients say that if they were approached or informed about a particular clinical trial, they would have participated. The reality is they were never informed. They just didn't know. They followed the treatment their physician prescribed. So the mission of Springwell 360, it's very simple, but yet it's very powerful. I want to ensure that clinical trials represent the diverse populations that rely on healthcare innovations. When a medical device or medication is approved, it's literally approved for everyone. But if we only have a homogeneous group of people participating in the studies, then our data set, or the data that's driving the approval, is really limited. And so it's so important that we have representation so that everyone can benefit from any sort of new innovation in medicine. And our vision is to create a more inclusive clinical research landscape where everyone, regardless of their race, their gender, or socioeconomic background, has equitable access to participate in and benefit from medical research. And I believe that when clinical trials are diverse, health outcomes improve for all communities. Now, I know there are historical injustices that have happened that led to the situation we have now, where some groups are very mistrusting of researchers. And we really need to do more when it comes to community outreach towards addressing that mistrust and rebuilding trust and rapport and ensuring that exploitation, injustice, and all of that never happens again. And that's part of my motivation for starting Springwell 360. This stemmed from seeing time and time again, that mistrust, the lack of representation in clinical research, especially for underrepresented groups like women of color, which, as you can see, I am a woman of color. I belong to an underrepresented group. And I knew that something had to change. Not only was this inequity leading to gaps in treatment, but it also meant that, the healthcare needs of entire populations were being overlooked. And so through Springwell 360, my goal is to address these challenges by working with researchers, healthcare providers, and communities to ensure that clinical trials are more accessible, they're more inclusive, and ultimately they're more equitable. And my goal by doing this is to break down the barriers that have historically excluded many from these opportunities and to reshape the future of healthcare for all. Most importantly, my goal is to raise awareness of clinical trials as an option for care for everyone. So, what are our next steps with Springwell 360? There are a few things I have in mind. I want to expand beyond just working with some academic centers on, their diversity plans, clinical research sites on diversity and recruitment. My goal is to expand by creating a series of comprehensive courses that will be designed, to educate and empower more professionals in public health and clinical research. Some healthcare professionals simply aren't even aware of what a clinical trials are. I've encountered nurses who weren't really sure what research does. Like, research just seemed like some mythical entity in the hospital, and they really weren't sure what was being done with these research studies. So my goal is to help to inform more professionals as well as community members on clinical trials. This will be a new exciting chapter for us, and we'll be focusing on areas where we see the most need for knowledge and growth. I plan to offer courses on clinical trials, focusing on health equity, possibly courses on how to become a professor in public health, clinical research, the strategies that can be employed. And these courses will be accessible and structured to provide both the foundational knowledge and advanced strategies for navigating these areas. My goal is that these courses will build a network of informed and empowered professionals and community members alike who will be dedicated to advancing public health and ensuring equity for all. So I know my presentation here is brief. So I do have some key takeaways from my journey. And I shared my journey into public health with all of you. And as I reflect on my journey in public health and clinical research, there are a few major lessons that help to shape my career and my approach in this field. Number one is that of persistence. There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be obstacles. And whether you're conducting research or advocating for health equity or leading, any sort of initiatives, it's really important to stay committed. Like I shared, I saw this issue of diversity, or the lack of diversity rather, since 2010, when I first started working in clinical trials. But it took COVID to happen for, our government and other entities to really start taking notice and promoting it and saying we need to address this. The FDA issued a recommendation that sponsors now need diversity plans. This was not the same situation 20 years ago, even though this was an issue 20 years ago. So I'm glad to see there is more discussion around this, there's more awareness so that we can get closer towards health equity. So, it's important to stay committed, even when things seems difficult. Persistence is what's going to help you break through any barriers and make any real change. The next thing that I've learned along my journey is that of continuous learning. It's not just, okay, I've studied, I'm done. No, public health and clinical research, we're always doing research to learn something new, right? And so it's an ever evolving field, and staying current on new research, new techniques and approaches is really going to be key. Throughout my career, I've found that the more I learn, the better equipped I am to address any issues we face, from clinical research challenges to broader, health inequities. And the last thing is that there is a profound impact of community. Everything we do in public health should be focused on the communities we serve. They should not be focused on, the big CEO out there. Remember, it's the community who has the benefits. It's the communities that we're serving. And whether it's ensuring clinical trials are inclusive or advocating for better healthcare access, the end goal is always to improve the lives of real people. And it's important to center our work around the needs of these communities and to listen to their voices. I do talk sometimes on community engagement. So community engagement is not, you come in, you get what you need, and you leave. It's being involved in the communities, helping to foster growth, helping to promote, wellness in these communities where they see your presence and build on that trust and rapport that so badly needs to be repaired. And lastly, health equity should be a priority for all public health initiatives. We should not have situations where only a select few have access to quality health care and everyone else is left struggling. So health equity really should be a priority for all public health initiatives. And without health equity, we really are missing the mark on what it truly means to promote health and well-being. Because we need to ensure, as public health professionals, that everyone has the same opportunities for care and treatment, and that would be the foundation for a healthier society. So here is my contact information as well as my website. This is who I am. And we can open it up for questions now. I believe there were some that came in on the chat as I was sharing my journey.
That was a wonderful presentation, Dr. Spring. And we do have some questions in the chat. And as you can see, folks really appreciate it. You have little party hats and claps coming up on the
I
screen
see the
for
claps
you.
coming through.
Yes, yes. So if it's okay, I'll read you the questions and you can answer. That would be
Sure.
oh, great. So the first is, hello, Dr. Spring. With your wealth of combined work experiences in public health and clinical research, and also as an entrepreneur, do you have the capacity to hire early professionals who are looking for job opportunities in public health, clinical research, or both? And I think also to tag on to that, Dr. Spring, if you would maybe describe like your offering some advice on how folks might approach finding these types of opportunities.
Right. So I would say a lot of it, to answer the question, I don't have the capacity right now, maybe in the future. But to answer the question about, strategies for securing positions, I was in your shoes not too long ago. I had just finished with my PhD and here I was looking for a position. Some of it really depends on how you market yourself, okay? Start to think about your niche area. and what it is where it is in public health you want to go. I always say to my students, start with the end in mind, okay? Where do you see yourself ultimately? And think about the steps it will take to get there. So if your goal is to become a professor, if you've written a dissertation or master's thesis or capstone, I would recommend publishing that paper into a peer-reviewed journal and making sure that's on your resume, making sure that's on your LinkedIn. When you're applying to jobs, make sure you mention this, highlight, hey, I did XYZ research and it's published here. And, attend webinars like this, volunteer with certain organizations, such as BCPH. Put that on your resume. And the skills you learn from volunteering could really help you hone in on the positions that you want to apply to, as well as give you skills that you may not gain working in a 9 to 5. And these skills can put you ahead of someone else. Now, you may think, why volunteer? It's working for free. I have volunteered with organizations where my time commitment was maybe 2 hours for the month, but I certainly learned skills that I would not have gained on my 9 to 5, that helped me move from one position to another. So that would be some strategies I'd recommend as you start the job search, and making sure, helping you to get aligned with a position that is within your skill sets and what you're looking for.
That's wonderful advice. Um, Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think what you say is so true. And the other thing is when you do volunteer with an organization, you basically not only volunteer for that period of time, you become part of that organization's family, and
Yeah.
other opportunities may arise, and there may be job opportunities down the line. So, do you offer volunteer opportunities with your organization, Dr. Spring?
I do offer internship opportunities. Yes, I
And
do.
where can folks learn about those? Or
On the website, Springwell 360, there's an internship page with an application. Yeah.
okay, well, you heard it here first. So
Yes.
yes. So we have another question. Phyllis asks, thank you for your work you're doing and adding your cultural background to the milieu. It goes a long way to helping to build trust, particularly with African Americans. Can you describe some of the studies you have worked on and how you have marketed to draw a diverse audience?
Sure. So one of the studies I worked on was the belimumab study. And this was a study specific for lupus. And this drug ended up being approved by the FDA. I think it was around 2010 or 2011, and for lupus, and it was the first drug approved for lupus in over 50 years. And I saw that in the study, the participants just did not make up who live day to day with the condition. If you know who has lupus, it's typically women of color of childbearing age, but the people in the study did not make up that demographic overall. And so, one of the things I went to the hospital and shared that we should do is having community participating in churches' health fairs. A lot of churches, and I lived in New York at the time, a lot of churches in Queens, Brooklyn, Harlem, the Bronx, they have health fairs. And if we could get the hospital to sponsor even water or have a tent at these health fairs, that goes a long way towards, helping to rebuild that trust, recognizing the name, seeing that, we had brochures on the condition. People were stopping by at the table saying, my sister has lupus. How do I transition to this hospital? Right? Because maybe they were at a community hospital or being treated by a primary care physician, and they were not aware that there are clinical trials that may help improve their quality of life. So these are some of the things that, thinking outside the box, that can be done towards helping to bridge that gap with the community and helping to address diversity needs.
That's that's very profound what you just shared. I thank you so much. I guess some folks also have asked if you would be willing to share a public version of your slides, because some folks wanted some of the information that you shared as well as your contact details. Is that a possibility?
Sure, absolutely. How do I share it?
If you send it to us, we'll share it with the
Okay,
attendees.
okay, that's
So
fine.
that's great. So yeah, and a little heart came up for that. That's wonderful. And I guess some additional questions. I was just wondering if you might be able to share with us or have some comments about the importance of community partnerships in this type of work in terms of building trust and getting more diversity in clinical trials. I didn't know if when in that work you were doing, if you perhaps worked with organizations that had strong roots or ties with the community, and just hearing your thoughts about that.
Right. So I think community partnerships, when it comes to addressing diversity in clinical trials, that this is it's huge. It's important. It shows we're in it for the long haul. We're not just in the community to get your information, to get your sample, to get your data and leave. Community partnerships needs to be strategic. These hospitals, they can again be a part of local health fairs, whether they're sponsored by churches, schools, um, whatever the organizations are, sponsor local kids groups, sponsor lunches if it's a pharmaceutical company, and sponsor lunches for kids who can't afford it. By seeing that, that logo in, at the games or wherever, people are going to start to see, oh, they're doing this in my community. They put on that event, and whatnot, and they're going to start to think of that company as good for the community, right? And it may seem small, but these are things that are going to go a long way towards rebuilding that trust and building rapport when it comes to reaching underserved populations. Because right now, the mistrust is there. And how do we build it? We want to make sure that it's not just a take, that we're also giving to these communities so that these communities can have healthier outcomes and, better growth and all of that when it comes to communities and community partnership. I want to stress that we're in it for the long haul.
No, that's you raised some really profound points when it comes to that. Particularly around like, making sure communities know you're not just coming in to like get their sample and leave. That is really at the heart of, some of the issues that really keep people from the barriers that keep people from participating in trials. And also just working with a community organization, I can imagine just really helps with that education process. I even remember from my own dissertation work when I worked with community organizations, you know, has seeing the community organization and the people who work there trust me. The community trusted the organization and it kind of passed through.
Right.
So,
I'm
thank
I'm
you
gonna
for,
go and I'll give
go
an
ahead. I'm sorry.
example. Let's look at what's going on in HIV, right? HIV has been known to affect communities of color, but and there was a stigma affiliated with it. But because of the grassroots work that was done with pharma and community organizations, now we're at the point where we can literally eradicate HIV. I happen to live in Atlanta, and the prevalence of HIV is pretty high here. And if I'm driving, it won't be uncommon for me to see a billboard that says you equals you.
Yes.
What that means is, undetectable equals, you can't transmit it. It's untransmittable. You can't transmit it if it's undetectable. Almost, like if we've come to the point right now, and this is due to research. This is due to the community partnerships that, we've gotten to the point now where if you're HIV positive, your viral loads can now become undetectable, right? And so if we continue to promote this, but now we have PrEP, where it's prophylactic against catching HIV if you are, engaged in any sort of, activities that may put you at higher risk, or even certain, day-to-day activities. Who knows, right? But we have PrEP, we have PEP, and so it's because of these community partnerships. It's because of, the partnerships and alliances with pharma, academia, the community organizations, being out there, raising awareness, why we've been able to get to this point where it's not a death sentence to be diagnosed with HIV anymore. So that's one example of community organization and community partnerships, leading to improved outcomes.
Yes, no, exactly, exactly. And just the trust is still so much part of it. My dissertation was actually in the field of HIV. I was working with Black men who have sex with men, gay and bisexual men in Washington, D.C. And there was so much misinformation about U equals U. And some of the participants literally would say things like, oh, I've not heard of that, so this lack of, information being shared with those who would benefit from it most. And also hearing about it and saying the knee jerk reaction being like, well, that's not for Black, gay, and bisexual men. That's only something that can be practiced by white, gay, and bisexual men. So that's interesting of itself. So that's where that building of trust really comes into play. So thank you for sharing your thoughts about that. They really go a long way with expediting or explicating that material. And thank you for sharing that the chat was broken down for a moment. So Dr. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I just said, oh, I didn't realize the chat was broken down for a little bit.
Sometimes, the Zoom world is wonderful, and then also it has like its own little things that it does to make things harder. So you also mentioned the importance of always being, always evolving, always learning, and incorporating what you learn into your work. And I was just wondering if you could offer any examples from your own practice.
Sure. So whether it's attending webinars or conferences, you know, looking at the next, recommendations on research studies when you read a peer-reviewed article, there is always time for there's a gap in the knowledge here. Here is what, we need to know, evolving. My dissertation happened to have focused on principal investigators and their challenges that they face when it comes to recruiting and diversity in clinical trials. And there was so much I learned from that. So just making sure that you're always learning, always evolving, because the data from 20 years ago, some of it has evolved, some of it has changed, right? And rightfully so, because we're putting so much work, so much funding into certain public health initiatives. So that's what I'd say about always evolving and staying current with the literature.
Oh, wonderful. And how does this impact like your programming and the like with your organization? Do you
Sure.
travel
So,
through the
mhm.
literature or through your contacts, in community organizations?
So this impacts it in terms of, especially as we create the courses, making sure that our courses are up to date with up to date information. Making sure that if we are working with, a university or a small clinical research site, that we are presenting, the most up to date information when it comes to recruiting underrepresented populations. Because the reality is, it's not a one size fits all approach, right? Which from what I see in some clinical research studies, they have a one size fits all approach. I've also seen some marketing materials tailored to people who look like me that were offensive. And I'm like, who approved this, right? Making sure that we are at the table when decisions are being made, not after the decisions are made and say, oh, now come help us recruit, right? So, yeah.
No, that is couldn't be more true, So who is approving this? When would be the optimal time to bring folks into the process?
At the very beginning, I heard someone say before, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So, um,
Yeah.
at the very beginning, at the inception, and I always say with that partnership, it shouldn't be that the researchers are here and the community members are here. It's an equal partnership because there are going to be things community members will be able to share, especially when it comes to the burden of participating in some of these studies that, a researcher who means well, right, may not have gathered, may not have picked up on. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that your study could be successful, collect the data it needs to, improve the outcomes of the communities that you're serving. But if it's designed in such a way where it's burdensome or it violate certain cultural norms, then that way you'd need the members of the community at inception with helping to guide the protocol and study design process.
Wonderful. Um, that is, yes, and I'd never heard of that phrase about if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Um, but it really does say something about, how we should approach this process,
Mhm.
with as researchers, but also as, in terms of thinking about it from the point of view of someone who might be receiving these materials, might benefit from these studies ultimately, and making sure that they're part of it. There's some things coming in the chat here. I see someone really also, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Someone said that's a great and true saying there. We have folks coming in from all over the country, from Georgetown, um, and all the way from Dallas. So thank you very much for being here today. I was just wondering, what do you see for the future of your organization, Dr. Spring? What do you hope to accomplish in the decade to come?
In a decade or so, my hope is that more people are aware of clinical trials as an option to their care. My hope is that we see more underrepresented populations, that the clinical trials participants move from a very homogeneous group to one that is really representative of, the landscape, of who's living day to day with the conditions, that the eligibility criteria aren't excluding people, of who may be from underrepresented groups, because certain lab thresholds alone will, exclude certain people from participating in the studies. And so that alone, limits, diversity in participation. So my hope is to see, studies that really enroll and are accessible for everyone, regardless of their background, so that we can get, the information that's needed to advance care for all.
Well, wonderful. And someone just mentioned here, Kim Bullock mentions that you're describing community-based participatory research. Um, and it's not something that's not often used in biomedical research or clinical trials. Did you want to speak to that?
Well, that is true, right? And I mentioned before where I saw recruitment materials for a skin study that was targeting women of color, but then it said people with dark skin, our skin never burns. And I looked at that and I'm like, are you serious? I know if I spend a lot of time in the sun, my skin will burn, right? And that kind of reminded me of, times when they would teach that Black people don't feel pain, and that led to pain medications being withheld from Black patients who received certain procedures, but then pain medications were given to other patients who had the same procedures. And you're so right, CBPR is often not used in clinical research, but but we're seeing that shift. And I've seen it happen especially in HIV, where there is CBPR with, community members, um, community-based organizations partnering on CABs, for which is community advisory boards for HIV clinical trials. I've seen it start happening in lupus clinical trials where the patients and advocates are there from inception. So it's good to see that it's being, taken up some more, and it's not just being limited to qualitative research, and it's starting to transition because there is value and there are benefits to it, being in these clinical trials, to have CBP part of the model in clinical trials.
Yes, no, thanks for bringing up those points, and especially around, you know, you mentioned community advisory boards, and I was just wondering from your perspective, who would be ideal members of the board? Should it just be representatives from organizations or those who might be participating in the trials, a mix of both?
I mean, and that's the point, right? I think community advisory boards should be diverse. It should not just be, scientists. There should be lay members of the community as well, because these people are going to have insights into the communities that they live in day to day that, a well-meaning scientist or researcher may not have, and really help to to guide that research in the direction that it needs to go.
Yes, that's a very prescient point. And also, Kim Bullock also mentions that NIH is currently conducting listening sessions covering community-based genomic research, and the NIH sessions are being held today. So your talk is even more prescient in terms of um, its timing and also, before these talks and also the subject matter. So how wonderful that you were able to join us. Um, I was just wondering, we're coming toward the end of this session here. I was just wondering if you had any parting thoughts um, for I guess, talking about like the further direction of um, research trials and the like in terms of ensuring, safety, inclusivity, and also just, I hate to use the word sensitivity, but the idea that someone in the 2024 would release information saying that certain groups of people don't burn in the sun. Um, where do you see that headed, or what would you like to see happen?
Sure. So I think we've come a long way, and I'm really grateful for that progress. But we still have, quite a bit way to go. Just imagine a world where, healthcare equity is there. We've reached it, right? One of the things I always want to say is that participating in clinical trials, these efforts that we're making towards diversity in clinical trials is literally one of the pathways we can do to get to that place of health equity. Because when you think about it, the only way medicine is advanced is through clinical trials. An RCT, randomized controlled trial, is known as the gold standard, right? And that's literally the only way medicine is advanced through research. And so if we're limiting certain pockets of the population from contributing, we are limiting, advances in certain conditions, whether it's, for conditions like lupus or sickle cell with, disproportionately affect, African Americans. If we're not participating or the trials are not available to us, then it makes care and advancement for these conditions in these populations very elusive. And so, that would be my take home message, that health equity, if you can imagine a world where we've achieved health equity, diversity in clinical trials is, the pathway to get there.
That couldn't be a better way of putting that. And certainly, there has to be something more than just putting out a brochure with like, specific stock photos from a community you want to serve. At the folks know when the intention is real and that it's coming from a place of service and not from a place of exploitation. And as researchers, that's a good starting place, something to consider. And I always say there's nothing more dangerous than someone who means well. So just really keeping in mind the idea of safety and non-exploitation.
That's
Um,
true.
Dr. Spring, so excited about the work you're doing. We are so fortunate at the Boston Congress of Public Health to have you be part of our family,
Honored.
and to be able to honor you and the work that you're doing is truly a gift. If folks need to get in contact with you, we're going to be sharing your contact information. And let me just make sure. Oh, we do have one final question for you from Kimberly Wimberly. She wanted to know, Dr. Spring, what has been your the greatest accomplishment in your work?
Well, the greatest accomplishment in my work, I would say it's something personal, but that would be welcoming my baby in 2020 while working full time and doing my PhD. We all know what happened in 2020, right? So that's what I would say is my greatest accomplishment.
That is truly an accomplishment. I can't, that is amazing that you were able to do all of that. And and to be able to accomplish all that you had, it's like dancing backward, you know. Ginger
Thank
Rogers, so
you.
Fred Astaire was like, Ginger Rogers always said, I did everything Fred Astaire did, but backward. Multiply that by about 1,000, and that's where you get what you just described, having a baby and dissertation all in 2020. So, well, I'm glad that you made it through that with flying colors and that you were able to join us here today and share these wonderful accomplishments. Um, so we will be sharing Dr. Spring's contact information. Um, Someone just said that's a stellar gift, and
Thank you. I see all the hearts and everything. Thank you.
yes, yes, um, all those hearts and more. So look at them all coming up at once. So thank you very much. I did mention that someone here today would be a recipient of a free elite membership with us. And that person is going to be, let me hold on, I have down the name here. Deborah Evans was the winner. Um, Deborah, if you could stay on if you have a moment, and we'll get that sorted. Everyone else, uh, if you did want to take advantage of today's offer, that is in the chat. Let me give out that. I put in the chat the link one more time. That's www.bcph.org/elite. Someone just asked about clinical trials for lupus in Michigan. Um, if you have that information, Dr. Spring, or we can also provide contact information for.
If they can contact me, I can put them in touch with someone likely who can, yes, they can contact me. I'd be happy to help with that.
Okay, great. So lots of congratulations. We're going to be ending here. Thank you very much, everyone,
Thank
and
you.
have a great day. Thanks, everyone.